The control keyframe function gives the graphic operator the ability to manipulate certain keyframes within the scene. So we're going to set up a quick example here of how this works. And first, whenever we're working with control keyframes, we first need a top level group. So I'm going to slide a top level group down here. I'm also just going to go into my scene settings and turn on a background so that we'll be able to see what we're doing just a little bit better. Now I'm going to go into my built-ins tab and I'm going to drag a cube down as a subcontainer of my top level group. I'm going to go into my server and we're going to throw a material on this as well, just so we'll be able to see it a little bit better. I'm going to scale this up. And let's say in this example, we want to give the operator the ability to adjust the alpha. So I'm going to go into my built-ins, into my global folder here, and drag the alpha function onto my cube container. And I'm going to click on the alpha. And now what I'm going to do is set some keyframes here. So I want my cube to start at 0% alpha. So I'm going to adjust this alpha at 0. I'm going to set a keyframe. At 60, I'm going to advance it up to 100% for the alpha. And then I also want to adjust it back down to 0. So I'm going to adjust it back down to 0 and set another keyframe so that when I come into my stage here, I have this animation. And if we click play, the alpha fades up and then it fades down. So I want to give the ability to the operator to change this alpha. So I'm going to go back into my plugins here, into the control folder, and drag this control keyframe. And I'm going to place this right onto my cube container. Now, the one thing that we do need here is to name a keyframe. So I'm going to go back into the stage. I'm going to select my middle keyframe here. And here we can give it a name once the keyframe is selected. So I'm just going to call it A1. I'm going to go back into my control keyframe function. And first thing that we have is the field identifier. Since this is our first control function within the scene tree, I'm going to leave the field identifier at 1. The description here is cube. We can change this to whatever we want. So if we're going to be changing the alpha, I'm just going to change this name to alpha. Now we also have the ability here to expose time. I'm going to leave that off for now. There's also the ability to control the parent. So if this cube container was a child of another container, we could turn this on and have it control that upper container. We have a minimum input, a maximum input, minimum value, maximum value. I'm going to leave them as is right now. We also have an input value, which I'm going to leave at 1. And down below that, there is a keyframe. Now, this keyframe is where we need to type in the keyframe name that we gave it in the stage. So I'm just going to type in A1 right here. Now, we're going to save this scene and take it into Trio and test it out. So we're going to hit save, and then we'll go into Trio. So once I'm in Trio, I'm going to import this scene here. And we'll go navigate to where the folder is, and here we have the control keyframe, so I'm just going to import it here by dragging left. I'm going to double click on it, and here we have the alpha and our tab field. So when we click on this, it takes us up to our alpha setting. And you can see that we have a numerical value which goes from 0 to 100. So this is the keyframe that we gave the name to, A1, it says. So we can set however much alpha value that we want. If we wanted that 70%, we can set that, and when we hit play, the alpha only fades up to 70%. If we want to go a little bit lower, we could do, let's say, 40% roughly, and we'll hit play, and it only fades up 40%. Let's go back into Artist and make some changes now. So once we're back in Artist, if we come back into our control keyframe here, we also have the ability to expose time. And I can turn this on. Once we turn this on, it gives us a keyframe time. And here we can set seconds. So I'm just going to type in 2. So I'm just going to type in 2 for now and leave it as is. I want to hit save again and jump back into Trio and try this out so that we can now adjust the time as well. So once in Trio, I'm just going to right click on my scene and I'm going to re-import this scene. And once we double click on the scene, we now have the A1 alpha value and we have a time. So we can now choose the time too, and this is in seconds. So if I want this to happen at 3 seconds, I can type in 3 seconds and we can change the alpha value here to, let's say, 50% at 3 seconds. And when I hit play, you can see that this cube will now fade on after 3 seconds and only go to 50%. So now you have 2 parameters controlling this alpha, the time and the alpha variable. Let's jump back into Artist and we'll do one more example here. So once we're back in Artist, we're going to do one more example here. And this time I want to use a control text function. So I'm going to find a font and drag this down into my scene tree. I'm just going to throw a material on it as well. And let's move this cube down and off to the side a little bit. We're done with that for right now. So for this font, what I want to do is use a text effects. So I'm going to use this TFX color, and I'm going to drag this down onto my text field here. I'm going to go into my TFX color, and I'm going to set a color range. So I want the color range to begin at yellow, and I want the color to end at red, let's say. So we'll just give it that color range there. So let's also change this text here, and we'll type in something like temperature. And we'll use this as our text field. So I'm just going to scale this up a little bit and reposition this. We'll move it down a little bit. Now back in my TFX color, I need to set some keyframes. So my progress is at 0. I'm going to rewind my timeline, and I'm going to start at 0, set a keyframe. I'm going to advance this up to 100%. And as you can see, when I do that, it changes the color range here. I'm going to set another keyframe. And if we want to set it back to 0 again and set another keyframe, we can. So within the stage here, we now have our font and we have our little animation. As I advance my timeline, you can see how it goes from yellow to red and back to yellow. We are going to name our middle keyframe here, so we'll just give this a name of C1, let's say. You can name it absolutely anything that you want. And I'm going to go back into my built-ins, into my control folder to grab the control keyframe function. So I'm going to drag this control keyframe onto my font container now, and I'm going to go into the control keyframe. This is our second control function in the scene, so I'm going to type in my number 2 for the field identifier. I can give it a description if I want. I'll just type in temp here, and we can give it other variables if we want. We can expose the time. We can turn on control parent. This time we're going to turn on minimum input, so we want number 1 and a maximum input for 10. We're going to leave the minimum value at 0 and maximum value at 100. The input value we're just going to leave at 1, and the keyframe, we need to give it that keyframe name that we named it within the stage. So I'm going to type in C1 right there. So I'm going to save this scene and then test it out in Trio. So once in Trio, I'm going to right click on my scene that I had in there already. I'm going to re-import this. And now when I double click on this scene, I get two things. I have our first one here. We have the alpha from our cube that we adjusted before, and we now have this new one here called the temp. So if I come down into my tab field here and go into the editor, what we have is 1, and we can advance this through 1 to 10. And this was the minimum value that we import and the maximum value that we input. So if we only want this to go to halfway now, we can set it to 5. And as we advance our timeline, it's only going to go halfway. So when we hit play, you can see that it only goes halfway and goes back. If we want it to go all the way, we can take it all the way up to 10 and have it go all the way up to 10. So you could use this to represent how sunny of a day or how hot of a day it is if you want to adjust this on the fly. So this is a quick example of how you can use the control keyframe to expose parameters for the operator to adjust that.